Tonight, we won't follow a single rooster announcing the morning, because in the Amazon, the day arrives as if the forest has all the time in the world. First comes the low hum, not one note, but hundreds, layered so finely you can't tell where one insect ends and another begins. It is the sound of wings slicing air, of tiny bodies vibrating in secret rhythms, like a hidden orchestra tuning before the performance. Next, a slow percussion joins in, leaves brushing against each other, heavy fronds bending under their own weight, branches creaking as if they, too, are waking reluctantly. Somewhere a bird calls, not once, but 3 times, each note falling like a pebble into water. The echo disappears into miles of green silence before another voice answers from far deeper in the canopy. The light follows last. It doesn't pour in. It seeps through layers of vines and mist, turning the air itself into a pale green veil. By the time you notice the sun, it has already warmed the soil, painted the river gold, and wrapped itself around your shoulders like a humid blanket. And as the firelight fades, the jungle keeps its own fire burning, one you cannot see but can always feel. It rises not from wood or flame, but from the air itself, thick and restless, pressing against your skin like a hand that never leaves. By midday, the heat no longer surrounds you. It inhabits you, winding through bone and breath, until even the shade begins to sweat. This is where the day truly begins, with the heat that never ends. Dawn in the Amazon arrives slowly, as if the forest itself is stretching awake. First comes the thin hum of insects comparing notes on the night's humidity, then the faint clatter of palm fronds brushing against each other like distant cutlery. No single bird announces the day. Instead, the jungle wakes in layers, each one louder and greener than the last. By the time the third layer unfolds, the air is already turned heavy, the kind of heat that settles on skin like a second, sticky heartbeat. So lower the lights. Let the weight of this jungle press softly against your ears. And if your breathing begins to match the slow, patient rhythm of this place, you can stay with us a while. If quiet journeys like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share the time and place you're listening from, perhaps the next campfire will be waiting for you there. The Amazon's heat does not arrive. It lingers like a guest who came yesterday and remembered to bring all its cousins. In the hour before sunrise, when cities are cool and bakeries are comfortable, the river basin is already practicing for noon. The air holds water not so much in droplets as in opinions. People here measure time by the behavior of plants and birds, rather than by clocks, because a clock face cannot tell you when the passion flowers will open, or when the clay lick will turn into a parrot pageant, or when the afternoon rain will commit to being actual rain rather than rehearsal. The ground is never merely ground. It is mulch on mulch, a library of old leaves returning their paragraphs to the soil. When you stand still for a minute, you do not simply stand on the jungle, you accumulate it. Your ankles collect seed fluff, your shirt takes on the aroma of green pepper and wet rope, and the sun, when it clears the canopy, makes your eyelids feel like warm postage stamps. It is around this time that the little patrols arrive. Mosquitoes appear first because they are punctual. They draft flight plans that somehow include your elbows, ankles, and 1 square inch behind your left ear that you have never directly seen. The tiny sandflies file lower, quick as punctuation marks. Then the ants come in varieties one does not usually encounter at breakfast. Leafcutters, tidy as librarians, pass by carrying lime green triangles like formal invitations to a very private salad. Somewhere out of sight, the hunters of the canopy send a memo. Watch your step. Someone new is learning to walk in vines. By the time the sun is fully awake, you are a respectable intersection in the city of small lives. None of this is personal. It is merely the way the jungle says good morning. Local life leans into this rhythm with the skill of a person who knows where every nail is in an old wooden floor. People wake before the sun's best effort because it is polite to be vertical while the air is still nearly breathable. Fires are coaxed from yesterday's embers, a task with its own etiquette of small blows and careful patience. There's cassava bread, crisp as a page, and fruit that tastes the way green looks. Water is fetched from a stream that is less a line on a map and more a long discussion between frogs. Children lean in hammocks, listening to adults discuss weather with the seriousness of accountants. Heat advises the schedule, and the schedule politely obeys. When it is time to gather food, the forest offers a syllabus that would look impossible if it were printed. Fishing is a topic with footnotes. There are hooks and lines, of course, and ingenious nets, but there is also the patient practice of using crushed. Vines timber a plant with opinions about oxygen to still the water long enough to scoop up a living dinner that will be thanked aloud. From the bank, this process looks like a conversation conducted in lowercase letters. Upriver, hunters move with a slowness that is not hesitation but courtesy. There are blowguns whose darts carry a plant's quiet chemistry, and the darts are kept with ceremonial neatness in little quivers that have more dignity than many briefcases. The forest is not an opponent. It is a teacher known for pop quizzes. The pop quizzes are often fruit hidden 3 meters above an honest person's reach, and climbing becomes not an athletic event but a polite negotiation with bark. Feet that grew up on concrete do not take this test well. The trees make no comment. Lunch occurs where it is sensible, which is wherever a patch of shade is wide enough to include everyone. Fire is made again, because in the rainforest is always both plentiful and difficult, like conversation at large family dinners. Food is roasted on green sticks that do not burn quickly. There is a mild argument about salt. There are stories about the time a tapir walked straight through a camp with the unbothered air of a person seeking the exit in a museum. Someone always remembers the year the river dropped so low that fish waded in puddles and crocodiles looked exactly like logs until it was important that they did not. A dog dozes without regret. Time is measured by the length of a shadow along a log, a wonderfully sincere clock, though it falls behind during clouds. In the late afternoon, the houses prove that architecture is not frightened by water. Stilted homes rise from damp earth with the airy confidence of herons. The floorboards know the sound of bare feet, and the ladders are so familiar that people climb them with both hands occupied. Hammocks hang like commas in a sentence, soft pauses where conversations nap. It is considered normal to own more hammocks than chairs, a ratio that would alarm furniture catalogs but pleases spines. In many places, people sleep diagonally in a hammock, creating a flat plane the way you draw a clean straight line from corner to corner. The fabric is not a swing so much as a supportive thesis. Visitors, tempted to lie like a banana, discover that a night can be remarkably long. There are gentle tricks, a rolled cloth beneath the knees, a light blanket even in heat, because night air slips across skin like a cat that has ideas. The roofs of these homes listen hard to rain. When storms arrive, the thatch produces a sound like 1,000 pencils writing the same note. Rituals, which outsiders love to collect as anecdotes, are not performed for the purpose of being exotic. They are calendars and responsibilities. When a festival climbs toward evening, the path to a clearing fills with laughter shaped by years of practice. The dances are not auditions. They are the rehearsal that never ends. In one community, a boy stands very straight because it is almost his time to wear the glove woven with bullet ants, a test that newspapers like to turn into headlines. The boy's relatives, who have themselves been through it, tell old jokes. The glove itself is a small architecture of leaves and intent, and the ants, known for stings like a thunderclap in a teacup, are introduced as stern teachers rather than villains. The first time is the worst, like the first day of any job. The ride is long. The world narrows to breath and song. Then it widens again, including the boy in a different way, as if the village had set his name in bold. There are quieter rules that historians sometimes list as taboos, a word that makes them seem fragile. In practice, they are practical and exact. Certain fish are avoided during particular seasons because the river is tired of giving and deserves a month off. Hunters share meat along kin lines that function like invisible roads. Food from the field and food from the forest meet on the same plate. One plant must always be cooked until it has entirely forgotten its old self. Another must never be mixed with a certain vine because that pair argues inside the stomach. Children learn these not as commandments, but as recipes for not being foolish. In a world where everything is present all the time, ants, heat, rain, useful leaves, dramatic birds, the rules are a sieve that lets wisdom pass through. The shaman's shelf, if one may call it that, looks like a botanist's to-do list and a poet's shopping trip. Here's the bark that calms a cough, the latex that persuades a wound to close, the ash that defeats a rash, the tobacco that makes the spirit pay attention, the resin that smells like a hymn. Somewhere nearby is a twin for each of these that would make a person extremely horizontal forever if used without thought. The difference between cure and catastrophe can be the thickness of a leaf, or whether a root is harvested in the morning or the late afternoon, or whether a plant growled when you stepped near it last week. Apprenticeship is not a weekend seminar. It is years of polite listening. Outsiders bring notebooks, which is charming, and the forest does not mind, but the notebook cannot record the way a plant's scent changes when it hears rain. People who grew up here say the forest is a person. People who did not grow up here suspect that might be a metaphor. The medicine works either way. Meanwhile, the jungle makes a point of reminding everyone that it has a sense of humor. A tree that offers sweet fruit also keeps an army of ants who consider your forearm an ethical problem. A gorgeous blue butterfly starts its life as a caterpillar that would prefer to be somewhere else, and it spends most of its adulthood looking like a fallen petal until it flies, at which point it becomes the final word on blue. A bird that sings like a flute turns out to be the size of a fist. A fish with admirable camouflage exists entirely to make your net feel clumsy. When heavy rain arrives, paths become short rivers, and short rivers become persuasive rivers, and everyone is more than usually interested in which logs are actually crocodiles. The villagers think ahead about this sort of thing without mentioning it. They position canoes where they will float at the right moment. They stack firewood under an overhang where tomorrow's storm cannot find it. Preparedness is not a personality trait. It is good manners. Night brings a second dawn, dark and luminous. The river changes voices and speaks in pages rather than paragraphs. Fireflies mark the understory with a code that does not require decoding to be beautiful. Far away, something large steps on something dry, and no one is impressed. The stars appear in any pocket of sky they can locate, and behave exactly as they do over cities, though people in cities rarely stop long enough to notice it. Hammocks become maps of sleep. Dogs lie under them like punctuation marks. Somewhere a baby argues with bedtime and loses with dignity. The older people tell stories that are not about heroes conquering anything. They're about people getting along with a place that has preferences. By late night, the heat has relented by the width of a breath. The air smells like wet string and fruit peels, and smoke that remembers earlier hours. You would not last a day here, says the city part of your brain. And this is probably accurate in the sense that you would not do the day correctly on the first try. You would put your foot in the wrong place. You would forget to sit down in mid-afternoon. You would tell a mosquito very politely that it has made its point, and the mosquito would not agree. But if you were allowed days the way a seed is allowed days, quiet, repeated, mostly unremarked, you would begin to learn where to put your feet, when to lean, how to let the river fill a silence without feeling the need to speak back. Morning comes again with its gentle appliances, the kettle sound of insects, the clink of the palm fronds, the soft rumor of boats downriver. moving at a deliberate speed designed by current and paddle. People rise before the sun completes its to-do list. Fires are built from ash that still remembers yesterday. Children balance on the ladder without looking. A woman tests the edge of a blade with the thumb that knows it. A man treks the net that once belonged to his grandfather, then to his aunt, then to him, as if knowledge were a kind of rope that everyone takes turns holding. From the kitchen comes the sound of cassava being grated, firm and rhythmic like rain with an opinion. In the doorway, a hammock with nobody in it continues to swing because the night has not quite left the house. Out on the trail, the leafcutter ants reopen their little green highway. You can smell their garden somewhere underground, a faint sourness like the air of a bread oven before the bread is put in. A woodpecker taps on a hollow trunk with such concentrated helpfulness that you imagine the tree might answer back. The vines that yesterday were simply there are today very much there, and your day's chances of dignified walking are once again modest. The river offers a reflection so complete that it briefly feels as if there were a second forest living upside down, a parallel world where the birds have decided to fish and the fish have mastered flight. If you remain awake at this hour, I promise that later there will be a footnote about certain ants being used as sutures, their jaws pinching a wound closed before their bodies are kindly detached. There may also be a small digression on the social life of stingless bees, which keep pots of honey that look like miniature amphorae and smell faintly of resin and patience. These details are not for excitement, but for company. The rainforest contains an encyclopedia that has not been fully indexed, and most of its entries are short, which is perfect for evenings when the mind wants to wander down small paths and call it study. There will be more to say about the way rain chooses its moment, and about the music of frogs that sound like lost toys, and about the little clay banks where macaws argue kindly about color. There will be more to say about hammocks, which are proof that human architecture can be generous to spines, and about fires, which are proof that persistence can be warm. There will be a few careful sentences about the vines that help with fishing, and the plants that help with fever, and the nearly identical cousins of those plants who require a different conversation entirely. But for now, the day has opened its book to the first page, and the first page is always the same. Heat like a familial embrace insects like polite neighbors' birds, like small brass instruments that learn to improvise people doing what their grandparents taught them to do because it works. You might not last a day here if lasting means bringing your city habits unchanged, if it means demanding that the air become less moist because your shirt would enjoy being dry, or that the ants suspend their civic projects because you would like to place your foot exactly there. But if lasting means something quieter, something like noticing something like walking more slowly than your thoughts, something like letting a hammock correct your posture and a river correct your schedule, then you would last long enough to learn the names of a few leaves. You would last long enough to taste a fruit that looks like an idea and a fish that tastes of clean mud. You would last long enough to add your breath to the steam that rises from a cup of tea made from bark, at a time of night when the jungle is both entirely awake and entirely asleep. And since this is meant for sleeping, we will not arrive at conclusions. No one will be rescued or defeated, least of all you, who have traveled only by listening. The jungle will continue to hum. The river will continue to rewrite its sentence around a rock it has known for centuries. The ants will carry something important to someone who is very small and very busy. The hammocks will make their elegant diagonals, and the roofs will accept the rain with professional courtesy, and the medicine shelf will smell like a long conversation with a forest. If you drift off now, you will not miss anything that will not happen again tomorrow, in roughly the same order with the same kindness of detail. The heat will wait for you on the first page. The mosquitoes will take attendance, and the green, in its unhurried way, will continue to turn up the dimmer. word by leafy word. You might not expect a sleepy wooden sphere on a pole to run half the world on time, but that is more or less what happened for a while. Before the air carried voices and numbers, and long before your phone reminded you it was Tuesday with an alert about something you don't remember agreeing to, there were time balls, large, politely painted globes that went up in the morning and fell at noon. So ships could set their chronometers and cities could pretend the sun had agreed to an appointment. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe, or simply decide that gravity has subscribed for you and drift along. Either way, the ball will drop exactly once, which is the kind of commitment we can all admire from bed. The idea arrived in the 19th century with the gentle inevitability of steam. Longitude had been sulking at sea for centuries, and the solution, precision clocks on a rolling deck, worked best if everyone began by agreeing what now was. So, in a handful of ports, a mast sprouted, and on the mast a pulley, and on the pulley a rope, and at the end of the rope a sphere as solemn as a new moon. The keeper would hoist the ball to the top shortly before noon, the way a baker raises dough to see if it has learned to be bread, and captains in the harbor would stand by with chronometers that had crossed oceans in padded boxes like very small, very valuable pillows. At the strike of noon, which was determined by an observatory's eye on the sun or a clever pendulum's opinion, the ball would drop. The drop was not theatrical. It was factual. The moment the globe moved, a dozen little brass hands twitched, and time became official in a way you could point at. Life around the mast took on a ritual that looks calm in print and damp in memory. The keeper unlocked a little door at the base of the tower and climbed a ladder that had opinions about boots. He checked the traps laid for pigeons who believed the ball was an unusually modern cloud. He inspected the cordage, which was thick with tar and frayed exactly where yesterday's wind had been rude. He tied flag signals to a smaller halyard one flag to say the ball would go up, another to warn that the drop was imminent, a visual drum roll for anyone too far away to see the fine details. Sometimes he chalked the mass where the sun had bleached it, because chalk makes poor wood look crisp in photographs that would not be invented for years. The keeper's notebook recorded the weather with the same patience it recorded time. Mist, 8:43. Gulls unusually argumentative. When the ball rose, the harbor changed key. Telescopes appeared at open hatches. Deck apprentices straightened as if posture could influence gravity. On quayside balconies, clerks put down their sandwiches to stare at a circle. The sight had the charm of an object doing exactly one thing exactly once a day. Even the sound was tidy, a rope hiss, a wooden thump, a collective exhale. If the ball stuck halfway, a thing that happened when damp swelled the groove, or when a gull with big ideas sat down at the wrong moment, there was a flutter of disappointment and then a sensible plan. B captains noted, 12 o'clock minus a small fraction, corrected by canon, because many cities, not willing to place all their punctuality in one basket, also fired a noon gun. It was the 19th century's version of two-factor authentication. Look up, then listen. It is easy to forget how many little domestic details a public instrument requires. The ball had to be repainted in sedate colors, black to show against a bright sky or red to show against a gray one, with a thin white band the width of a man's hand so that distance didn't swallow the event. Its surface collected the precise amount of dew necessary to offend sleeves. The mast wanted linseed oil, and the steps wanted a new nail where a heel knew the absence of one. Wind loved to misinterpret the flags. A cat discovered that the keeper's office was warmer than the street and never forgot again. The key to the observatory clock lived on a nail near the window. Someone hung it on a different nail once, and all of Thursday was a little longer while everyone looked for it using sentences like, "I am certain it was here," which are famous for their inability to be helpful. For the sailors, this quiet domestic theater solved a problem they wore on their wrists and wrote in their logs. A chronometer lost or gained a second as loyally as a vine grows toward whatever is nearest. Left uncorrected, that small drift became miles wrong by the time you reached the bright water but on the horizon. So captains watched the ball, waited for the moment it fell, and nudged the little hand that kept the longship honest. The operation took less time than a yawn. Many of them did it while holding a pencil in their teeth. Some did it with a ceremony that suggested they were adjusting the sun rather than the instrument. The better the watch, the less the gesture mattered, which is a theme many useful things share with umbrellas. As the practice spread, the time ball gained a personality in each port that installed one, the way church bells acquire local nicknames and opinions about weather. In some towns, the ball was a municipal celebrity. People planned lunches around it. Offices used it as a sanity check. If the ball is dropped, we have missed the post, said an entire generation of correspondents whose letters traveled at the speed of envelopes. There was the day of fog swallowed the mass so completely that the keeper rang a handbell as hard as he could at the moment of drop, an act that could not possibly help and yet did. There was the afternoon a prankish wind blew the flag into the bowl, and the ball wore it like a shawl for an hour, which was not in any manual but delighted small children. Smaller towns with smaller budgets built smaller masts and smaller spheres, which did exactly the same job with precisely the same gravity. Inland cities with navigable rivers copied the practice, not because ocean-going ships were moored there, but because the city liked the feeling of being connected to a larger system by a thin rope and a daily ceremony. Far away, in observatories that did not see the sea, the ball became a pet instrument. It gave staff a reason to look out of a window and write, "Drop 12 hours, 0 minutes, and 2 seconds by the observatory clock," in a logbook that now reads like a diary for an introvert who loves weather and ropes. One keeper is said to have kept a second ball on the floor to use as a doorstop, a detail that historians approve of privately. At the edges of the system, time balls behaved like ambassadors of precision meeting cultures of approximation. In some harbors, boatmen rowed out not to observe the drop, but to ask the keeper afterward, "How did noon feel today?" and accept the answer as much for the friendliness as for the minutes. A miller in one town reset the village clock each week based on the ball, and each week he lost a few minutes climbing the hill to reach it. He could have written the numbers on a slip of paper. Instead, he memorized them because walking uphill with hands free is older than paper. Somewhere else, a factory whistle and the time ball struck an uneasy truce. The whistle wanted to announce lunch when workers were hungry. The ball wanted to assert astronomy. The compromise was that workers ate when they were hungry, and the whistle gave its opinion anyway. All this grandeur of exactness coexisted with an unchanging truth. Noon is more of a neighborhood than a point. The sun does not pass a city like a train passing a station. It ambles over several streets at once, and the ball's drop chose one side street to be official. People nearby were outvoted by geometry. The compromise was elegance itself. The observatory told the keeper when to release the mechanism based on the local meridian, and everyone else adjusted by habit. Shops set watches by the ball, then set lunch by the stomach, then set the afternoon by how long the floorboards sounded hollow under footsteps. Different kinds of time are perfectly comfortable sharing a city. Meanwhile, the technology grew shyly louder. Some balls were connected by telegraph to a master clock and dropped not by a keeper tugging a rope, but by a current completing a circuit. It is the kind of detail that sounds modern, even when you know it happened under hats. Wires climb masts like ivy trained by a patient gardener. In a few places, the bulbous drop was coupled mechanically to a cannon, so that sight and sound were wed. One system misfired once and announced noon at 11:58, which caused no harm beyond a harbor full of men squinting at the sun and accusing it of haste. A later model rewound itself with a hand crank that produced the precise level of resistance a person associates with honesty. By now, the custom had traveled farther than the ships it served. People gathered on promenades to watch a polite sphere acknowledge gravity by appointment. The event gave a day a satisfying hinge. Children counted down from numbers no one had taught them to count down from. Shopkeepers used the drop to confirm the integrity of their window clocks, whose faces were large enough to read from across the street and whose minute hands could be persuaded to cooperate with a nudge. A poet in one port called the ball a second moon that keeps its promises, which is the sort of line a person writes when they have heard the word deadline pronounced by printers. Inevitably, there was also weather. A calm day made the drop a silent punctuation mark. A windy day turned the halyard into a violin string and the mast into an opinion. Rain made the wood swell like a cake. In heavy snow, the keeper swept the steps twice, once for safety and once to admire the pattern of his own diligence. Somewhere, a thunderstorm arrived exactly at noon, and the ball dropped into a flash of light that made a dozen captains' hearts stutter and then tidy themselves. The logbook for that day says, "Atmospheric interference, no harm," which could be written for many parts of life. The end, if we can call it that without sounding dramatic, came on soft shoes. Radio learned to speak the second. Telephones practiced saying, "At the third stroke, it will be," with the measured authority of someone who has never mislaid a sock. Later, signals went by wire and then through the air so quickly that the ball, as stately gravity, looked like pageantry rather than necessity. A few cities kept their spheres because tradition is a kind of architecture that holds a roof over memory. A famous square built a ball only for the last night of the year, turning the sober noon ritual into a midnight party, a transformation that would have bewildered early keepers and amused their cats. Others moved their balls indoors to museums, where children can stand beneath them and feel, briefly, the gentle pressure of history leaning like a round hand on a round shoulder. Yet, even now, in certain ports, the ball still climbs and drops, as quiet as always. There's the same rope hiss, the same polite thump, the same small adjustment on a dial somewhere. Even if the dial is only a souvenir in a glass case and the adjustment is only in a person, S had a friendly correction to an internal clock that has spent too long under fluorescent lights. It is strangely restful to know that a city can keep a promise to itself every day at noon without asking for attention. The mast does not wave banners unless the weather recommends it. The keeper, or the circuit that has inherited the keeper's responsibilities, does not add speeches. All that happens is that gravity receives a time-sensitive invitation and accepts. If you stayed awake long enough to meet the true connoisseurs of these devices, you would find them trading facts that are small and satisfying. Somewhere, an old photograph shows a ball being revarnished on sawhorses, the painter's hat making a shadow on the curve like an eclipse. Somewhere else, a page of a ledger lists the cost of a replacement rope in handwriting that dips at the tail of every G, as though the pen were a little lazy after lunch. A retired mariner tells you that his favorite part of any port was the moment when a sphere fell, and the whole harbor acknowledged agreement for 5 seconds, like strangers nodding on a bus. A former keeper explains that he could tell by the tone of the wind in the stays whether he needed to wipe the track with oil. It is all very practical and very agreeable, and not exciting at all, unless you like to be soothed by precision. And if you drift now, that is fine. The ball will keep dropping whether your eyes are open or closed. Noon will continue to be a neighborhood rather than a point. The clocks that used to live in velvet-lined boxes will keep time in museum cases. And your phone will borrow seconds from a satellite in a conversation so quick it might as well be silence. Somewhere, a cat still naps in a keeper's office because the habit has outlived the job. Somewhere, paint dries on a sphere that has already known more weather than many roofs. But there is no ending to reach for. There's only the reliable downward motion at the center of a day, the soft agreement of ropes and wood and people, the small ceremony that says in an even voice, now, and then lets the afternoon continue without explanation. You might not expect the morning to start before the sun has fully decided what to do with itself, but in the deep river basins, that is the schedule, and the schedule is not flexible. Dawn, there is not a time. It is a thickness, a kind of warm, damp certainty that lifts itself out of the leaves as if the forest were exhaling a very long story. Your pillow, which is actually a hammock because the ground is a biography of small surprises, has opinions about gravity and your spine. A faint smoke thread from last night's fire still curls under the thatch because smoke discourages the enthusiastic and winged. A gourd rattle sounds from another corner of the longhouse where someone has stood up to remind the rest of the world that standing is possible. If you're still awake in a few minutes, and if the mosquitoes let you keep enough blood to lift a finger, you can subscribe, or simply allow the insects to subscribe on your behalf by tracing a dotted line in your memory. The jungle is very good at paperwork you never filled out. Heat here introduces itself as etiquette rather than punishment. It slides into your clothes and shakes hands with your hair. At home, you may have used weather apps. Here you use your forearm. Press it lightly to the air, and you can tell if the day will be the kind of warm that invites conversation or the kind that declines to attend. The elders call attention to a practical detail. Move slowly. Running persuades the air to notice you, and once the air notices you, it wants to hug you continuously. People rub annatto seed paste on skin, a cheerfully red reminder that insects consider cosmetics a treaty. The paste marks the children like careful brush strokes so their parents can see them in the early light, which makes of the morning a quiet parade. A woman pulls braided fiber from a basket and winds it around a toddler. Wrist because bracelets hold repellent better than wrists do. The forest approves. It always approves of things that are braided. Every few minutes, something small lands on you as a kind of polite inquiry. The mosquitoes are not one species, but a rotating committee, each with a slightly different agenda and a different preferred time to ask for a meeting. Some prefer ankles. Some prefer the soft geography behind your ear. Ants cross your path with the oblivious professionalism of commuters who have already learned every bump in the route. A child points to leafcutter ants carrying lime green flags of leaf overhead. First you think celebration, then you realize it is agriculture. Each ant cuts a piece of leaf it will never personally eat, so a fungus far below will be happy. If you listen long enough, you may conclude that the whole forest is a cooperative arranged by accountants. A teenager demonstrates the correct way to shake out a boot, heel tapping against a pole until the silence after the thud confirms that nothing with opinions is hiding inside. Someone remarks gently that your deodorant is interesting as a concept and will be remembered fondly. Breakfast is a plain conversation between fire and cassava. The world here runs on manioc, which, like many productive colleagues, is mildly poisonous until treated with patience. Roots are peeled with motions so practiced they look like shrugging. They are grated on a board studded with tiny stones or old fish scales, or, in an older story the elders tell, shark teeth traded from very far away, whichever abrasive history had on hand. The pulp becomes a soft hill and a woven sleeve called a tippity, which is not quite a word you can say without smiling. The long sleeve is hung from a beam and twisted with a stick until the liquid drips out in a steady rhythm that quietly narrates the morning. This liquid is not for casual drinking. It is for cautionary footnotes. The squeezed meal goes to the hot clay griddle and becomes flatbread that snaps when it is done telling you it is done. Coffee happens if coffee has traveled this far recently. Otherwise, there is a bitter tea that makes the tongue sit up straight. Children eat first because they can, and because they are less patient than starch. When the light has made up its mind about being day, life separates into errands that will be remembered as ordinary. The forest is a library with different committees. Vines in one wing, fish in another, birds sometimes on every shelf. The hunters take blowguns as lengthy as stories and small quivers of smooth darts. The darts are tipped with a paste made from vine sap and other secrets boiled slowly into a gravity that plants have been developing for longer than clocks have been ticking. The paste does not act rudely. It acts efficiently. A hunter holds a leaf between finger and thumb and gestures the day's plan as if sketching a map on the air. No one whistles. Whistling assigns your location to things that did not ask. A few older men carry short bows out of principle and affection. The dogs lean, expressive, and convinced that the world is a catalog of smells, go along for company and commentary. On the river, fishing is done with nets that have learned the manners of the current, or with hooks baited with confidence. Some days the river behaves like a generous cashier and returns change beyond expectation. Other days people pound the bark of a particular plant and sprinkle the froth in a backwater where fish come up to forget how to be themselves for a brief interval. It is not cruelty. It is a polite request decided by chemistry. Children watch from the bank, all elbows and questions, counting turtles and arguing about whose paddle is the better paddle even. Though paddles are identical because identical things can still be argued about when the morning is long enough. Someone's uncle points to a cloud of tiny silver fish that moves like a thought. He says their names softly, and the name is a little river all by itself. Gathering is its own day. Women and men move through the understory with baskets that will return full of geometry, green bananas, which are not dessert, but destiny, palm fruit that shows on your hands like paint, pods that rattle with protein. Climbing a tree for honey looks, from the ground, like an argument with physics, but in fact it is a polite conversation with bark and notches. A coil of vine lets a climber lean back and trade weight with the trunk like two old friends. Smoke again has a role, this time to convince bees to sit still long enough for thank yous. A child collects the shed skins of insects because they look like pages from an invisible book. The child declares a scientific principle. Everything interesting is either sticky or stings, sometimes both. No one disagrees. By noon, the longhouse is a study in shade. The floor is suspended on poles, which is less dramatic than it sounds and more practical than it looks. Distance from ground to floor is calculated not by architecture, but by ants and water. The house lives above both. Breezes, when they find the building, are welcomed in and given important jobs. Hammocks curve like sentences waiting for verbs. If you lie in one, you discover that swaying is more efficient than sitting for considering anything. The arrangements inside are simple and therefore intricate. A central hearth, tools hanging where fingers can remember them, gourds that hold the day's liquids, baskets that hold the day itself. When rain begins without ceremony, it sounds like cooking, and everyone continues as before. The afternoon is for repair, which is a global human tradition. Fiber cords wear where the notches love them most. They are replaced. Thatched roofs learn the habits of wind and need reminding. A canoe gets its seams repitched with resin that knows how to be sticky in the right weather. Children practice making knots that will still be knots tomorrow. One elder rewraps a rattle with seeds that took 2 seasons to dry and an additional season to forget that they were meant for anything else. Another elder tells a long, slow joke about a tapir who thought it could sing. The punchline is a tapir noise, and it is exactly funny enough. A visitor might be tempted to measure productivity here the way a spreadsheet would, but the forest uses different accounting. It prefers durability to speed. Your fitness tracker, were it allowed, would blink uncertainly and ask to be set down somewhere cool. As evening considers arriving, a hush that is not silence moves across the clearing. This is when rules become more visible, or perhaps when attention is sharper. There is a ritual planned, but you would miss it if you looked only for spectacle. Boys on the cusp of being men sit apart and try to make their faces behave like stone. They are not quite successful. Faces have opinions. Somewhere woven gloves have been prepared, the famous kind studded with very serious ants whose jaws meet a standard of commitment rarely matched by alarm clocks. The point of the ritual is not to injure, but to instruct. Endurance is not bragging. It is a promise to the group. The elders sing a low, comfortable song whose notes know exactly where they are going. Afterward, there is salve made from a plant that keeps secrets with admirable discretion. The initiates look the way people look after running a race against themselves and finishing at the agreed line. Later, they will be teased in gentle ways that store courage for next time. Not all rules involve gloves or singing. Some are dietary treaties with the surrounding world. One clan eats a certain fish only after the first planting because patience and plants should both have quiet. Another forbids hunting a species during its childcare season because the forest grades predators on politeness. Certain animals are avoided by expectant mothers because people prefer babies that sleep at reasonable hours, rather than adopting the habits of, say, the night monkey. A father of a newborn follows kavod, a custom that asks him to behave as if he too were recovering. He eats soft food and speaks softly and avoids tasks that smell too much like danger. At first you think this is symbolic. Then you discover symbolism is simply a more comfortable word for attention. Names have rituals too. A child's public name may arrive late, after elders watch for a characteristic that feels like truth. In the meantime, the child has a private name, spoken only by family, which seems impractical until you notice how careful everyone becomes when language is treated like fire. Whistling at night is discouraged in some houses because certain spirits answer whistling the way certain uncles answer messages, promptly and with an opinion you did not request. A visitor is taught where to place feet inside the longhouse and where not to sit because the floor plan is a cousin of the family tree. Gifts are returned not in the next hour, but in the next season, which is a pace that wallets do not understand, but trees do. The idea is not dead. The idea is the conversation of usefulness as it moves around a circle. There are moments when an outsider is tempted to make a list of dangers. A local would make a list of medicines instead, and the lists would be the same length. Resin from copaiba trees soothes bites and makes simple wounds remember to be simple. A bark infusion persuades a child's cough to consider retiring. Leaves of a plant with a name like a river are mashed and laid on a fevered forehead. The fever thinks about it and sometimes agrees. The vine whose extract tips darts for hunting also yields to a pharmacologist's jar and becomes an anesthesia that has turned noisy rooms into libraries all over the world. Guarana seeds, when ground and brewed, discuss the topic of wakefulness with real enthusiasm, which you will discover when your thoughts start learning choreography. Ipecac hides another shrub and has opinions about stomachs and decisions. None of these plants advertise. You learn them by walking behind someone who knows them and believing what you were told very precisely. It is also true that mistakes here are instructional in a particular livid way. A root that looks like cassava but isn't teaches the difference between appearance and dinner. A frog with skin beautiful as a festival warns in colors the same way cities use signs. A stingray buried under silt waits for the argument your foot will start. Locals shuffle where outsiders stride, and the fish respects shuffling. Flood time comes like a slow-moving wall and promotes the river into the courtyard. Houses on stilts become illustrations of foresight rather than fashion. Canoes tie up to the bottom step as if it had always been a pier. Chickens look mildly betrayed and then adapt. The forest approves again because adaptation is its favorite household rule. Night is not darkness so much as a change in authorship. The insects take over the editorial page. Frogs write op-eds from small puddles with great confidence. The stars are available when the clouds feel generous, and sometimes a red glow appears very far away where someone is burning a field out of old habit. In the longhouse, hammocks detect a human weight and answer with a curve that is almost a word. People talk in low voices about boring subjects that are, in fact, the subjects of civilization, who borrowed which pot and forgot to return it. Whether the roof by the eastern pole needs new palm thatch, whether the strawberries upriver will ripen before the festival that wants them. A child falls asleep mid-sentence and is swung gently by a parent whose hand could do the motion in the dark without names. If you listen carefully, you will hear the little frictions that make the day work. A pot lid fits a pot not because a factory measured it, but because a hand learned how to listen to clay. A spear point ground against stone explains patience without saying any words. The longhouse is a museum of solutions that are not new and therefore excellent. A visitor asks how many different kinds of baskets there are and receives the answer, enough, which is correct. A young woman practices the even beat of weaving with a comb that would make a metronome jealous. Fibers overlap in patterns your eyes could follow, but prefer not to because sleep is more persuasive than geometry. Sometimes history wanders into the clearing and sits down uninvited. Traders arrive with pots and metal tools and notions about time that do not match the shadows under the roof. A missionary appears with a dictionary that has not met most of the important words yet. A government map claims a straight line through a place where lines have never been straight, hopeful the way maps always are. The community nods, asks sensible questions, and continues arranging its day around fish and songs and school lessons taught by someone, Us cousin who grew up on the riverbank and now knows how to explain fractions using baskets. News travels by boat and by rumor, and both methods arrive eventually. The forest files a quiet memo. Endurance is a better investment than novelty. Another day begins early because forests dislike suspense. The same smoke threads up under the thatch, and the same insects write tiny essays that itchy people do not admire. The ball of the sun, slower than your watch but more reliable than your calendar, balances for a moment on the far trees and then climbs. Someone tests the griddle with a thoughtful drop of water that hisses the same way people do when they settle into a hammock that has reached the perfect temperature. Children run toward the river, attempting not to appear to be running because elders approve of dignity at all speeds. Dogs stretch until the day fits inside them. Across the water, a Huron forgets to be dignified and remembers again. Routine does what routine always does when it is well made. It carries everyone quietly. You would not last a day here if you insisted on being the main character of your own survival story. The forest assigns that role to moss. But you would last longer than you think if you decided to be a reader instead. There is a way to stand that makes your sweat useful. There is a way to hold a paddle that turns each stroke into a polite conversation with a river. There is a way to listen to a plant name that means listening to how your tongue rests afterward. People will show you these ways if you show them you can watch a basket being woven for an entire afternoon and remember the sequence of knots in order later. That is not a test. It is a lullaby for the hands. It is late now. The hammocks breathe with the people in them, and the night speaks in a dozen voices that all agree that repetition is better than drama. You might think of your bed at home and the way your own ceiling knows your habits. You might think of the way your kitchen hums at different volumes depending on the hour, which is not so different from a longhouse at rain o'clock. Somewhere outside, a nightjar says its name over and over until it becomes a background you can lean your head against. Tomorrow, the heat will rehearse the same introduction, and the mosquitoes will schedule similar appointments, and the cassava will travel the same path from root to bread. The river will argue kindly with its banks, and then agree to meet them again at the same place. No one will announce an ending. The day will simply place itself like a woven mat on the floor, and you will lie down on it and feel your thoughts slow until they match the gentle sway of string and wood and breath and leaves. and the forest will continue narrating itself in a voice that has no urgency and all the time in the world. You might not expect your alarm clock to be humidity, but in the Amazon, the air wakes first and then politely reminds everyone else. It is not a ringtone. It is a warm, damp announcement that the day has started, whether you personally agree or not. The thatch above you sighs. The hammock below you sways in a sentence that ends with a comma. Around the longhouse roof, smoke from last night's fire has lingered on purpose, rehearsing its job of keeping insects away. It doesn't keep all of them away, of course. The Amazon has no idea how many insects it has. It simply invents new ones whenever someone tries to count. If you're still awake by the time we compare mosquito schedules, feel free to subscribe or don't. The mosquitoes already have, with surprising enthusiasm and no respect for unsubscribe options. He is a historian here. It recalls every afternoon that has ever happened and insists on continuity. It arrives before breakfast and settles itself on your shoulders like a friendly, damp shawl that nobody asked for. People move as if negotiating with the atmosphere. They win by losing slowly. Annatto paste is rubbed on cheeks and arms. A cheerful red that is both decoration and declaration. Insects, please bring your meetings elsewhere. Even the dogs understand the policy of shade. They pick a cool spot and demonstrate a posture that could be titled, "I have considered activity and will not be doing it." Meanwhile, elders check the sky for news and the river for rumors. Weather forecasts here are measured in the behavior of birds, the height of ants on trunks, and whether the breeze remembers to show up for work. The history of heat is not dramatic. It is patient, which is somehow worse and also better. Then there are the small citizens of the air who run a very successful bite economy. Mosquitoes operate on shift work. One squad prefers dawn ankles. Another prefers evening wrists. A third specializes in the area just behind your ear where you can't see, which is thoughtful if your goal is never to stop thinking about your own head. They are joined by sandflies that behave like asterisks and ants that behave like law firms. Somewhere a column of leaf cutters lifts green confetti skyward, a moving parade to celebrate fungus cultivation, which they have been perfecting since long before supply chains were a term. The local advice is a syllabus: shake your boots, tuck your nets, and remember that an ant bite teaches you more about the present moment than most meditation apps. The forest provides constant continuing education. Breakfast is a conference between starch and fire. Cassava has opinions. In its wild form, it is not so much food as an opportunity to prove you have patience. Roots are peeled with long, calm movements, grated on rough boards set with fish scales or small stones, and packed into a woven tube called a tippity that looks like a long, flexible hourglass. The paste is squeezed until the liquid runs clear, ticking quietly into a bowl. That liquid is not invited to the meal. It is given other civic duties. What remains dries into flour and becomes thin cakes on a clay griddle that holds heat exactly long enough to make the morning smell like practicality. The bread snaps. Coffee appears if the trade canoe did. Otherwise a bitter tea from leaves that woke up earlier than you. Children eat first and fast, the way all successful people eat when the river has fish to consider. Someone adds a smear of smoked fish, another person a spoon of honey, and suddenly the simple food has a dialogue going. By the time the sun has lifted high enough to see the tops of trees, an altitude known technically as a lot, the day as errands arrange themselves. Hunters reach for blowguns that are longer than most arguments. Darts are carved from palm wood and kept smooth as reasonable policy. The tips are painted with a dark paste prepared from a vine and the sort of patience that could knit history. The preparation is not theatrical, it is thoughtful. The poison quietly persuades small animals to become still, a practical request in a place where protein travels quickly on foot. The blowgun itself is a study in high-precision boredom. a wooden tube polished so perfectly that a feathered dart will slide down in silence as if gravity has been asked to whisper. Firing is more about breath than bravado. The only applause comes from leaves rubbing each other's elbows in the breeze. Fishing is the other half of the conversation. Nets stitch water into baskets. Hooks wait with the discipline of librarians. Sometimes the river offers generous change. Sometimes it sends the equivalent of a polite refusal. On those days, people pound the bark of a certain tree and let the film drift into quiet inlets. The fish float up mildly surprised, like students who have been called on gently during a lecture. It is chemistry as courtesy. Children who cannot resist commentary count turtles on logs, and the turtles pretend not to hear. One cousin climbs for honey with a vine looped around his feet and the trunk, not for heroics, just because that is where the honey is. Smoke is encouraged to say, "Excuse me," to the bees. It does. Honey comes down in a pot that smells like sunlight filtered through 1,000 wings. The longhouse floats above the ground on poles. The distance from earth to floor is measured in ant philosophy and flood memories rather than centimeters. Breezes organize themselves under the eaves and move like someone shuffling a deck of very large, very green cards. Inside, the hammocks are grammar, nouns of woven fiber, verbs of sway, and a few soft adjectives from the children napping diagonally. If you lie in one for too long, you will see time become horizontal. Suddenly you understand why hammocks replace beds here. Beds resist. Hammocks collaborate. They learn you and they lull you, and if you intend to spend the afternoon productively, you may want to avoid learning your hammock too well. In the late afternoon, tools request attention. Rope made from palm fibers is retwisted. Canoes receive warm resin rubbed into seams, a spa day for vessels. Thatch is checked for gossip with the wind. Repairs are not a chore. They are a conversation with objects that work hard and do not complain. One elder rewraps the handle of a paddle with a pattern that speaks region and family, the way a tartan does in another climate. Children practice knots, devoting important minutes to learning which ones remember to stay tied. A quiet considers the clearing. The cicadas begin their recital. You notice you are interested in the speed of drying gourds. You notice you have become the sort of person who is proud that a basket you repaired last week continues to have the right opinions. Evening leans in. Rituals prepare themselves without announcement. Among some groups, the glove woven with the very determined ants arrives as a teacher. Boys who are boys in the morning learn how to sit inside pain without giving it a name. The glove is not a spectacle. It is a syllabus for courage. Elders sing a melody with the exact number of notes needed and nothing extra, like a canoe with no carving that does not help it float. Afterward, there is careful salve made from leaves that have studied comfort. Laughter follows at a volume chosen by the nightlow, shared, relieved. The lesson is not that pain is impressive. The lesson is that the group continues. Rituals extend into food. There are agreed-upon pauses in hunting particular animals because the forest is owed its childcare season. Pregnant women avoid species whose habits they would rather not invite into the household. Nobody wants a baby that believes it is appropriate to howl at 3 a.m. merely because a monkey does. Cuvette may ask a father to eat gently and work lightly to reflect the delicate transit of a new person into the world. Names often wait to arrive until elders recognize a trait that rings true, which is a form of patience disguised as caution. Words are treated like fire, useful, bright, and not for playing. The rules about eating are not eccentric. They are engineering. Cassava must be detoxified because history discovered a method that defeats a problem elegantly and then passed it down by repetition, which is the most reliable form of cloud storage. A spirit may own a bend in the river. You do not fish there without asking because the worst thing that can happen is not tragedy. It is offense. Someone might whistle in the dark and be reminded that whistling is a kind of invitation, and not every guest is in the mood to be gracious. Outsiders sometimes mistake all this for superstition. Locals call it experience with better manners. Medicine here is both literal and local. If a sting insists on being remembered, copaiba resin is rubbed in small circles until insisting becomes boring. For coughs, there is a tea that tastes like a polite disagreement. For wounds, there is a leaf pressed flat with the seriousness of a book placed back on the right shelf. A vine that powers darts also became the ancestor of modern anesthesia, because the forest does not bother to separate categories when a solution is handy. Guarana seeds are ground into a paste that contains the lecture notes for staying awake. You can feel your eyelids read them. Ipecac waits quietly as a shrub, ready to reverse unwise dinners. Quinine came from bark long before it arrived in bottles. The pharmacopoeia is a library where librarians walk barefoot and know each stack by smell. Of course, medicine and poison are twins wearing each other's hats. There are berries that introduce themselves as food but would rather be footnotes. There are frogs whose skins shine like small parties, and parties are not meals. An outsider learns to adopt a new habit. Do not eat what you have not been introduced to properly. Even a harmless-looking vine might decide your ankle is a cause worth supporting. It will tie its argument around you with admirable logic. Mushrooms file under interesting but not necessary. A visitor is shown the difference between two identical leaves. One relieves fever, the other makes it interesting. The difference is tiny and somehow obvious to those who have lived here through many Februaries, which in the forest are simply very determined versions of January. When the rainforest decides to remind you where you are, it chooses practical examples. An electric eel demonstrates voltage like a teacher who does not believe in slideshows. It is not aggressive. It is thorough. Piranhas are less dramatic than rumors and more curious than dangerous. Unless you bring lunch habits they find rude. A black caiman swims past like a log reconsidering its life choices. Jaguars appear mostly as stories told by people good at telling stories. You are far more likely to be bitten by a mosquito than by a cat with excellent taste. Floods, on the other hand, are punctual. They arrive with the river's long memory and reassign the yard into a temporary bay. Stilt houses become wisdom you can stand under. Canoes tie to the staircase as if stairs were born to be piers. Chickens move to higher rungs and discover new perspectives. There's also the matter of the things you did not see coming because they were not coming for you at all. A fruit drops early and mildly onto the roof because gravity is a democratic system. A colony of wasps relocates itself 3 meters to the left for reasons not up for debate. The proper response is to adjust your path and congratulate them on their new address. Somewhere a tapir enters the clearing with the emotional energy of a walking potato and eats a plant with the concentration of a librarian. An anaconda unknots itself from a bank and decides to be elsewhere with the calm of a curtain being drawn. You discover that the most thrilling moment of the day is learning the word for a particular smell the river has just before rain. You repeat the word to yourself like a spell that only improves the weather of your thoughts. Night again. The longhouse breathes with the people inside. Hammocks cradle sleepers in parentheses. The fire keeps a few coals awake for the morning because hand-me-down flame is easier than starting from first principles. Conversation drifts to practical legend, the best time to check a fish trap, the cousin who stepped on a stingray and how shuffling is superior to striding, the year the river rose high enough to introduce itself to the floorboards and how everyone agreed to raise the stilts after that, by exactly the height of one stubborn uncle. You understand that history here is a tool, not a gallery. It is used, worn, maintained, and attractive because it works. Morning will come early again. The insects will clock in with the professionalism of civil servants. The heat will deliver its reliable opening remarks. Cassava will surrender to good technique. Hammocks will lobby for more research into napping. Initiates will become slightly more initiated. A canoe will acquire a new scorch mark where resin dripped. Someone will bring back a story about a bird that hovered like an unanswered question over a patch of flowers. The river will not be solved or even especially described. It will simply be negotiated with daily. And you, lying somewhere between two bamboo poles and a reasonable plan for sleeping, will discover that the most restful thing about a place famed for difficulty is how unhurriedly it explains itself, repeating the same calm instructions again and again until your thoughts follow the slow swing of the hammock, the steady drip from the cassava press, the measured breath of people who already know how to last the day and, quietly, the night. You might not think of humidity as a historical figure, but in the Amazon, it has tenure. It arrives before dawn like a soft museum docent, unlocking the glass cases of air and reminding your skin that the exhibit is now open. The thatch sighs. A small lizard blinks like a slow idea. Smoke from last night's cooking fire hangs under the eaves as if it missed the last canoe and will try again later. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe or not. The mosquitoes already assume you've opted in to their newsletter daily editions. Multiple special inserts, no known unsubscribe button, printed exclusively on ankles. The jungle wakes before you do, and if you claim otherwise, the birds will. File a friendly correction. Heat begins as a rumor and steadily accumulates evidence. First it rests in your hair, then it nudges your collarbones. By breakfast, it has completed a thorough interview with your entire wardrobe and decided it prefers you without it. People move like professional negotiators, bargaining with sunlight. For a gentle settlement, the settlement is shade, customary, and binding. Dogs, who completed the course in tropical logistics generations ago, sleep under canoes with the seriousness of scholars. A grandmother checks the river her calendar by studying the color where fast water turns slow, the way a clerk might read the margin of a ledger. Insects are already at the office. These go to the flowers that open their storefronts exactly. On time, dragonflies draw blue grammar above the water. Butterflies look like misplaced stamps waiting to be collected. Somewhere in the understory, a cicada begins winding up a sound like a tiny generator. It is not strenuous. It is inevitable. The heat is not merely temperature. It is policy. Tin mugs are warm even when they hold cool water, as if they can't quite remember their job description. Shirts dry on the line in a way that means eventually. Bread toasts itself if you think about it with enough conviction. Early travelers noted the feeling of breathing through a warm towel. Locals note that towels are unnecessary because the air is willing to help. Still, everyone has their techniques. An auto paste goes onto cheeks in cheerful red streaks. Attractive. Insect discouraging and fashionably practical. The best shade moves on a person in a canoe behind a palm leaf. Houses face breezes the way sunflowers face light. History looks like an endless row of longhouses with doors politely aligned to catch wind that counts as a neighbor dot. Then there are the small creatures who practice medicine without licensing, specifically dermatology. Mosquitoes practice sunrise, and sunset shifts with admirable adherence to schedule. The dawn crew favors ankles. The dusk crew favors wrists. Both have strong opinions about the exact spot behind the ear that you will only remember when it itches. Sandflies are punctuation marks. They dot your calves with commas so that your sentences never end. Ants march in their own republics. Leafcutters cut perfect crescents from leaves to carry. Like green sails, small ships ferrying cargo to fungus farms. They have tended since before anybody on Earth used the phrase supply chain. If you ask politely, someone will show you a column trail that runs like a miniature highway, complete with traffic rules. No overtaking near the route, bridges installed during the rainy season. occasional maintenance by a particularly industrious. And the humor is mild. The engineering is not. Breakfast is an agreement between cassava and technique. Raw, the root is not food. After patience peeling, grating, squeezing through a long woven press called a tippity, it becomes flour as safe as a promise. The liquid squeezed out is redirected into other jobs. Waste is not a concept that thrives here. On a clay griddle, flour turns into thin cakes that break with a soft snap. Someone smears smoked fish onto one. Someone else strips honey from last. Months climb into a hive that tolerated the negotiation. Coffee appears if the trade canoe did. Otherwise, there is a leaf tea that tastes like a quiet decision. Children eat quickly because hunger is polite, but the river is not, and fish prefer early meetings. An elder tells you that the griddle retains heat exactly as long as men used to debate politics when the river was lower, which is to say, just enough to finish the job. By mid-morning, the day has put on its serious hat. Hunters lift blowguns taller than some of the people carrying them. A blowgun is not a weapon so much as a whispering tube. You need breath and courtesy. Darts are feathered just enough to catch the imagination of air. Their tips carry the dark. Paste that took an afternoon and several elders to prepare from a vine that minds its own business until asked to teach. The paste does not shout. It invites small animals into a thoughtful map. Even the polishing of the blowgun's bore is the opposite of dramatic. Every scrap of roughness smoothed, not for beauty, but because silence is an ingredient. The aim is not to impress the forest. The forest refuses to be impressed. Fishers choose other grammar. Nets gather water into paragraphs. Hooks wait with patient seriousness that librarians would respect. And oxbow lakes where the current forgets its purpose and becomes a daydream. Artificial foam from pounded bark may be let into the water. Fish rise slowly, as if responding to their names during roll call, and are collected with thank yous and a promise to maintain the rules. There is also the arrow aimed at the reflection of a fish, because light refracts, and so must the plan. Children practice by shooting floating fruit, which is the sort of homework that beverages admire. If the river is generous, there will be turtles on a log, counting hours with shell mathematics. If the river is stingy, somebody tells a story that distracts you until it admits fairness and gives up a few silver bodies for the pot. Houses rise on poles because the ground likes to rehearse flooding even when no performance is scheduled. The poles are memory. We remember how high the water came in the year of the skinny fish, someone says, pointing to a notch. The floor is a wooden raft with settled opinions. Breezes can crawl beneath and are encouraged to do so. Hammocks are everywhere because beds have ambitions and hammocks have mercy. A hammock is a gentle machine designed to remove your spine from the to-do list. You lie down for a minute and wake up financially solvent in dreams you can't remember. When explorers first wrote about hammocks, they made technical errors, such as climbing in as if the hammock were a rebellious chair instead of approaching it like a conversation. The correct approach is sideways, low, and ready to believe. In that position, even the afternoon has manners. Tools maintain themselves via human encouragement. A paddle that worked hard last season gets a new wrapping of fiber around its handle, with a pattern particular to your family. A canoe receives resin along its seams, rubbed in circles so small they become patience itself. Baskets are rewoven. Gourd bottles cure on a shelf, their skins turning from green to the brown of ideas. The practical arts are not chores. They are the geography of a day. A visitor might imagine boredom because the work is quiet, but boredom here is rare. There are too many unhurried details that would like to be done correctly, and then, inevitably, the rituals. Some villages keep a glove braided from leaves and heavily staffed by bullet ants. The glove is neither sport nor spectacle. It is a lesson in remaining. Boys wear it to become boys dash who dash know dash what dash pain dash is. They keep their faces quiet, not to prove heroism, but to practice future leadership where the village will need someone whose first reaction is breath. The sting is famous, which is one of those awkward honors. Elders sing songs that do not require harmony to work because history prefers participation over performance. Later, there is salve rubbed on with more kindness than the pain looked like it deserved. People laugh, but gently, the way the forest laughs at a storm that forgot to stay long. Food has rules, and the rules have reasons that are older than explanation. Certain fish are not eaten during their parenting months, not because the community lacks appetite, but because the river does not. Some meats are avoided by expectant parents who prefer not to pass along the twitching habits of monkeys or the nocturnal careers of certain cats. Hunters take only what can be carried, and carry only what can be eaten, and eat only what can be honored. There are places where you speak soft because the spirit might be resting. Outsiders sometimes flatten this into taboo. Insiders call it knowing where you are. Trial and error did the early research. Oral tradition publishes the results. Names arrive when they are ready. A baby is not hurried into a vocabulary it hasn't met yet. An elder watches how the child sleeps or smiles and offers a name that fits like a hammock that someone tested already. Some households practice kavad, where a father mirrors the fragile routine of the mother for a few days after birth. Eat gently, walk softly, avoid loud work, because the new person's path into the world deserves clear air. It's oddly modern, a kind of partner leave with mythological paperwork. The joke is that fathers enjoy the excuse to sit, but the respect underneath is the kind that keeps a society from resting. At the edge of the clearing grows a pharmacy, without shelves, but with excellent labeling if you know where to look. Copaiba, resin for stings, applied in little circles as if you're convincing pain it had other plans. Ipecac, discovered as a shrub long before a bottle, for the bad idea you swallowed. Quinine hiding in bark, history's earliest unsubscribe button. For certain fevers. Guarana, a seed ground into a paste that will keep you awake during lectures delivered by birds at 4 a.m. The vine whose paste powers. Darts also contributed chemistry to operating rooms thousands of miles away. That is just how the forest shares, anonymously and without bother. If your voice goes missing, a steam from leaves invites it back. If your knee complains, there is a poultice with excellent customer service, but medicines keep cousins who wear the same outfits as poisons. Two berries are nearly identical. One has opinions about fevers, the other has opinions about mortality. A frog wears the color of an argument. You admire and abstain. Mushrooms put on theatrical hats and assume you're impressed. You remain politely unimpressed. The local rule is comforting. Eat only what introduced itself through someone you trust, preferably someone who laughs at your jokes. Even then, introductions are repeated over years. Trust is an herb that grows slowly. The forest occasionally delivers literal curriculum. An electric eel is a science lesson with teeth. It requests respect, not drama. A caiman appears like a log considering philosophy, then corrects your identification with a blink. Piranhas exist, yes, but mostly as an excellent reason to avoid. Wiggling like a wounded fish where they hold meetings. Jaguars are stories with footprints. You are more likely to see where one was than where one is. You take comfort in the probability chart. Mosquitoes remain your most dedicated relatives. Floods, on the other hand, are annual memoranda. The river signs them with great flourish. Houses on stilts write their replies by not needing to move. Canoes tie to the staircase and genuinely enjoy the new arrangement. Chickens learn to roost on higher rungs and pretend it was their idea. Tools for the rainy season include the humble paddle. The generous pot and the reliable list of things that want to float. Dreams, gourds, dogs, if necessary. The geography reorganizes itself with the calm of a librarian reshelving books. Paths become creeks. Creeks become opinions. Fishing, previously a task, becomes transportation. Older people remember a year when the flood arrived early and left late. They smile, because remembering is a form of weatherproofing. When it retreats, the river leaves behind silt that the gardens read like an invitation to grow. Corn appears in rows that argue gently with the wind. Plantains shine. Cassava, steady as payroll, pays again. Night returns the village to parentheses. Hammocks cradle people in gentle curves. Someone tells a story about how the first fire learned to be shared among families by riding a burning log down the river, which is obviously a metaphor and also obviously true because the coals are real. Someone else whistles a two-note melody that the birds recognize as neighborly. The dogs rearrange their sighs. Stars appear, but only where the trees permit leases. The sky is less a roof than a set of windows. Morning will do what it always does. It will send humidity first, like a polite messenger who believes doors should never be knocked loudly. It will encourage the griddle to warm. It will remind leafcutter ants of their eternal appointment with agriculture. It will put quiet fuel into canoes people with errands, intentions, and the steady knowledge that everything here works because it goes slowly and repeats. You study a knot and tie it again. You check the dart tips even if you will not use them today. You listen for the gossip of wind. You find that the longer you stay, the less the forest appears hostile and the more it resembles an archive of habits anyone can learn, provided the pace is unambitious. If you expected sharp adventure, the Amazon replaces it with soft competence. The drama is minimal. The technique is exquisite. Out here a day is a loop, not a line. Heat gives shade, gives task, gives story, gives hammock, gives stars. And then the same with small edits by weather. Outsiders tend to last less than a day because they spend too much of it being surprised. Insiders last entire lives by being unsurprised in a very careful way. The hammock rocks left, rocks right, edits your plans, forgives your grammar, excuses your intention to stay awake, and persuades your eyes to close. The jungle continues without you. For a while, which is exactly what it has always done, and exactly what you came to learn by listening. You might not expect the air to arrive first, but in the Amazon it clocks in before sunrise like a very punctual employee. Warm, damp, and somehow a little perfumed vanilla from orchids, smoke from last night's hearth, it sits on your shoulders and hands you a quiet reminder that clothing is more of a suggestion here. Leaves polish themselves. A toad offers one courteous croak from somewhere under the boards. A pot leans on its side like someone planning to get up soon. If you're still awake by the time we reach the part with the ants that wear gloves, yes. There is a part with ants and gloves. You can subscribe, or you can simply let the jungle sign you up for its lifetime membership in humidity. The paperwork is heat here doesn't start, it swells. It lives in the roof thatch and the clay griddle and the quiet curve of a tin cup. A breeze does appear, but mainly to say it has other appointments upriver. People know the choreography. They open shutters toward the river. They step around puddles from yesterday's rain with the exactness of librarians. And they settle into the shade that the house itself is making. A broad, generous shade with more patience than several parliaments. Early travelers wrote about oppressive heat. Locals point out that it is simply consistent, like an elder who has decided that this is the temperature, and we will all be agreeable about it. Even the dogs are agreeable, sleeping under canoes with the professionalism of museum guards. The morning noises resemble an orchestra that has been told to warm up, but quietly. A woodpecker tries a tree post with a metronomic tap. A pair of parrots argue tenderly over a peepo fruit with the logic of a long marriage. Dragonflies write blue, cursive along the water. Somewhere in that shining sentence, a pair of fish discuss breakfast by not discussing it at all. The first smoke curls up from the hearth. It smells like history and cassava bread. Cassava or manioc or yucca, depending on your preferred dictionary, is a root that starts life by making strict biochemical arguments against being eaten. People counter with a tippity, a long woven sleeve that squeezes grated pulp until it surrenders its dangerous juice. The remaining cake dries on a clay griddle and turns into something crisp, sturdy, and quietly convincing. If civilization were a cracker, this would be it. You eat with a wooden spoon that has seen several generations of soups. Fish appears fried if the river was persuasive, smoked if the river asked for more time. Someone adds chili, someone adds honey, and someone else tells a story about a year when the river rose into the house and the chickens had to learn stairs. It is told without urgency. The stairs are still here. So are the chickens, who have evidently acquired opinions. Small. Citizens begin their commuting. Mosquitoes take attendance at ankles and wrists while pretending to be helpful lab assistants. If you wonder about their schedule, it is documented. The dawn shift favors cool skin and shadow. The dusk shift prefers warm skin moving towards soup. Sandflies add punctuation. They place commas along your calves to soothe you into believing that the sentence of your day will never end. Ants, meanwhile, run their leaf-cutting factories with a punctuality that would flatter a train system. Lines of green sails travel the forest floor toward underground farms, where fungus is cultivated with ancient delicacy. If you have not attended a leafcutter intersection at rush hour, you have not truly witnessed urban planning by mid-morning. The village has stretched and found itself. Hunters lift blowguns polished, hollow staff taller than the person carrying it, and check darts laid out like small exclamation points. A dart gets a wisp of cotton at its tail so that air knows. To study it, the tip receives a tiny smudge of dark paste from a vine whose chemistry later funded modern operating rooms. The paste has a reputation and keeps it politely. No one hurries. You hear light sanding of the inside bore, a whistle test, the approving grunt that means the tube is ready. The blowgun does not bark. It sighs. That is the point. Sound is for. Later, when stories are told, fishers take other tools, nets that fold like well-remembered maps. Bow and arrow intended not for sky, but for water, where refraction is a teacher that fails students who forget to aim below what they see. Lines made from fibers that spent last year as leaves. In a quiet inlet, someone pounds the bark of a particular tree and releases the foam into the still water. The fish rise not in panic, but in bewilderment, as if the surface suddenly became more interesting. They are thanked, collected, and invited to dinner with due ceremony. Children practice by shooting at floating mangoes, an exercise that adds delightful fruit to the excusable list of casualties. The houses are lifted on poles because the ground, like some relatives, likes to drop by without warning and stay for weeks. A notch on a post marks the year the water nearly reached the floor. Another notch reminds people not to build optimism into architecture. The floor itself, made of slats with polite gaps, lets breezes crawl in and also lets small objects fall through at inconvenient moments so that you remember to be careful. Hammocks swing between beams with an authority that beds rarely attain. A hammock is not just furniture. It is a suggestion that the day might be better if you let gravity do the scheduling. You enter it sideways and slowly, as you would a conversation with someone who knows better than you. Then it rocks you into a compromise you didn't realize you wanted. Noon is a heat that believes in itself. The village gets quiet in the way of places that know how to last. Baskets are rewoven. The palm leaf roof receives another careful stitch. A canoe seam is sealed with resin rubbed in circles, small enough to be mistaken for meditation. Someone carves a paddle and gives the handle a pattern that a grandparent will recognize from 30 years ago. Continuity is not an abstract noun here. It's an actual handle you can hold. Afternoon drifts toward the part of life that people from elsewhere call ritual, though the local word usually means something more ordinary, the correct way to take care. There's, in one community, a glove woven of leaves and crowded with bullet ants. You do not slip your hand into it for fun. You do it so the village can look into your face and practice trusting you later, when quiet is needed more than complaint. The pain is famous, but fame is beside the point. What matters is that the singing around you does not demand harmony. It demands participation. Later, you will be the sort of adult who does not shout at weather. Other observances are gentle to the point of invisible. A father who practices kevad will take on soft food and softer tasks in the days after birth, mirroring the mother to remind the community that a new person has just rearranged the furniture. Of time, the baby receives a name in a few weeks or months, when someone notices that the way she sleeps resembles a certain bird, or that his laugh tilts like a particular river bend. Many names acknowledge prior owner's grandparents, a fish, a kind of rain. You collect names like you collect useful baskets. They go with different outfits. Food keeps a ledger that includes seasons and the private lives of fish. A certain species becomes off limits while it guards eggs. A certain meat is avoided by expectant parents so that newborns will not inherit its restless habits. Some foods are forbidden because they belong to spirits. Others are allowed because a spirit once ate them in a story that still earns citations. Outsiders hear taboo and imagine a list on a wall. Insiders see a map of relationships, river to fish, plant to soil, people to both, and a promise not to edit it hastily. The rules are less law than etiquette. Evening is good for repair of nets, of friendships, of the day's small errors. A pot of plantain stew bubbles with the agreeable plop of a satisfied idea. Someone scrapes the griddle and tells about the time monkeys saw themselves in a shiny pan and were briefly convinced of a second troop living in the sky. Children laugh and request the story again tomorrow, even though tomorrow has not yet been assigned. The light lowers itself through the trees, a slow spooling ribbon. Moths come to the lamp in the same number every evening because mathematics likes to relax too. And then there is the famous medicine cabinet that grew without hinges. If you have a cough, a bundle of leaves steams you back toward usefulness. If a sting complains, a smear of copaiba resin has a conversation with it and usually wins. If a fever arrives wearing a serious expression, the bark of a certain tree provides a bitter lesson that cools you. The list goes on and refuses to exhaust itself. Nimble ginger for the belly, Andaroba for the joints. Guarana paste pounded on a stone and shaved into tea when morning needs help remembering. Knowledge lives in people, not in bottles. A grandmother can point to 20 plants from a stool without standing up. The pharmacy accepts song as a form of payment. The receipt is a story. Right next to these remedies sit their cousins with similar faces and very different intentions. Two berries look almost the same. One believes in easing fever. The other believes in removing the person who had the fever from consideration altogether. A frog carries a bright warning that is not for decoration. A vine looks friendly until it isn't. Respect is measured out leaf by leaf. There is a rule for guests. Unless you were introduced to the plant by a person who learned it, from a person who learned it from another person who laughs just like the first, you do not eat the plant. It is a wonderfully inefficient system that has worked for longer than anyone can remember. Of course, the rainforest has moods. The river prints them in big letters. In the dry season, it pulls back and reveals sandbanks where children become. Engineers designing cities of sticks with excellent drainage and poor tax policy. In the flood season, it remembers that it owns all the lower ground and uses the reminder liberally. Houses on stilts shrug and continue. Canoes tie up to staircases. Chickens practice being sailors with mixed success. Paths convert to canals. The jungle accepts this with flexibility because it designed the syllabus. Predators are present, but not dramatic. A caiman may drift like a skeptical log or blink like a slow camera. Piranhas are not the swarm of cinema fame. They prefer specific gossip and do not attend every party. A jaguar leaves prints that look as if the night has pressed pause. You probably will not meet it. Mosquitoes, though, will meet you repeatedly. The most dangerous encounters are often embarrassingly small. The scratch you could not ignore, the fever that needed the bitter tea right away, the misstep on a slick log because you were admiring a kingfisher with a better sense of balance. Than any philosopher, night does not so much fall as lean in. Someone rubs a bow across a musical mouth harp and draws a sound shaped like a moonlit ripple. Hammocks sway. The lantern throws its little island of light. Moths immigrate at once. A far-off storm produces flashcards of white that the undersides of leaves study carefully. The roof murmurs in rain. The smell is soft smoke, wet wood, and something floral that never remembers its name. Stars make brief appearances in the breaks between leaves, like visiting officials who decline speeches. You might imagine that living here requires constant bravery. It mostly requires constant noticing. The ground has opinions about where it would like your foot. The river has a tone of voice that tells you when it is collecting itself. The garden offers a lesson in patience that tastes like cassava again and is somehow still new. Tools endure because hands check them 5 times. Hunger is answered because people did not wait until they were hungry to think about the answer. The day repeats not because nothing changes, but because repetition is the architecture that holds change politely. Around midnight, the forest flips to its late shift. Tree frogs practice percussion with a dedication that would win awards if anyone were foolish enough to award night. Bats sketch curves in the air and eat the insects that earlier tried to eat. You, a fair exchange. Somewhere upstream, a canoe bumps wood against wood, and you can tell by the rhythm whether the person is returning heavy with fish or light with news. Time clicks into a slower gear, a hammock gear, a gear that belongs to quiet rooms where the only urgent thing is breath. You may not last a day here if you arrive with the wrong kind of effort. The forest is allergic to effort that refuses to. Listen, but if someone shows you how to step into the canoe foot low, paddle ready, wait amused, and you learn the 3 knots that make a roof calm, and you adopt the habit of thinking a plan aloud before you remove a leaf, and you respect. That shade is not luxury but policy. You might find the day extending itself on your behalf. You might learn how to nap with engineering precision. You might learn that a net thrown thoughtfully at the right angle at the right hour can find dinner where, moments before, there had only been water considering its options. By the time the first light returns, the air has already punched in. Again, friendly and damp and carrying the smell of the river's fresh gossip. Someone stirs the hearth. Someone checks the griddle. Someone steps down the stairs to see if the night left footprints. Dragonflies will come back to right there. Ink blue notes across the morning. The blowgun will be leaned against the wall, patient as a broom. Breakfast will be cassava again, and it will be exactly good enough. If you have done the day correctly, you will have very little to report, which is wonderful news. Quiet is an achievement we rarely put on lists. And if the ants with the glove are part of your day, you will breathe the way the elders do and stare at a particular knot in the beam, overhead until the song winds its way around your ribs and turns thee, pain into a small instructor tapping its pencil. Then the glove comes off. Salve is rubbed in little circles that feel the way shade feels. Someone helps you into a hammock, not because you are heroic, but because this is how people are returned to themselves here, slowly with rocking, are fine. You have always been fine. The river moves as if it has somewhere to be. The dogs revise their naps. The air, very punctual, arrives with a new message that is exactly the same as yesterday's, and therefore exactly right. You listen to it until you drift, and then the forest listens for you, which it had planned to do all along. You might think morning needs a rooster, a clock, or at least some sunlight to get started. In the rainforest, morning arrives on the back of the air. It slides in while it is still dark, a warm, damp animal that curls up on your skin and purrs. Quietly, like a cat made of weather, the thatch sighs. A tin cup cools by not cooling at all. You can tell the hour only because your breath feels like it wandered into a greenhouse, realized it was impolite to leave, and decided to stay. If you're still awake by the time I get to the part about the tiny frog that politely asks you not to touch it, feel free to subscribe. Or just close your eyes and let the jungle enroll you in its loyalty program. The bonus points are due. Heat here is a patient host. It does not spread toward noon. It settles like a blanket that knows exactly what it weighs. People do sensible things about it the way one might kindly humor a relative. Doors open before the sun actually shows. Pots are moved to the cooler edge of the hearth. Shirts become advisory rather than mandatory. Older travelers once wrote that the heat feels oppressive, but locals will tell you it is more like a very consistent handshake. It never forgets your name. Even the dogs have heat etiquette. They sleep underneath the canoes, bellies on. Damp ground, ears barely acknowledging the world with minimal administrative flicks. A gecko climbs the wall with the deliberate calm of a librarian returning a rare book. Listen long enough, and the day unveils its instruments. Something taps woodpecker on a rotten post. Something squeaks bats finishing a shift and filing their reports. A river turtle surfaces with a quiet punctuation mark. The village stretches. Smoke curls up from a hearth and writes the word breakfast in a language only noses read. On a low table sits grated cassava in a woven sleeve called a tippity. It looks like a long, braided snake with a job. People pull on one end, and the sleeve squeezes the pulp until the bitter juice, which is not anyone's friend, runs off obediently. The pulp becomes flour, and flour becomes flatbread on a clay griddle, a crisp circle that cracks like subtle thunder. If civilization had a cracker, this would be it, and it would be served with fish. Mosquitoes clock in with managerial briskness. They hold staff meetings around your ankles, possibly to discuss morale. Their favorite policy is to show up precisely when you stop paying attention. Sandflies act as their interns, leaving commas along your calves for later reading. Bees drift through like unbothered auditors. Ants are already on their commute, carrying leaf pieces like green sails, following invisible chemical highways. If you crouch, the whole procession looks like a parade held by extremely serious small citizens. They farm fungus and underground gardens and mind their business in a way that feels superior to many human meetings. The heat does not end. It simply decides not to start arguments. Mid-morning has the flavor of routine. Someone goes to check a fish trap set where the current hesitates. Someone smooths a blowgun with a few strokes of sand and breathes through it once to listen for the small, trustworthy hiss. The tube is long, taller than its owner, a polished wooden instrument that looks as if it might play music but chooses quiet instead. Darts wait on a little leaf tray like tiny pencils. Each receives a faint smear of dark paste from a vine that made friends with chemistry a long time ago. The paste is potent but polite. It has rules. You keep it in a gourd with a cork of bark and a reminder note written directly into your habits. Fishing in the river is not an argument. Either. You can. Cast a net that has been repaired so many times it contains a history of knots. You can shoot an arrow at fish in clear water and aim below where your eyes tell you, because refraction is a teacher with a tricky grading curve. Or you can climb with bare feet that know tree bark like a map, seeking palm hearts, fruits, or a particular insect whose larvae taste like nuts if you roast them just right. Nothing is rushed. Even the canoe understands this. It is carved from a single log, and when it slides into the water, you can feel its relief at remembering what it was always for. Houses stand on stilts, because the ground takes seasonal vacations upward. On a dry day, the stilts simply offer breezes. On a wet one, they make an island. Between the floor slats, you see slivers of the world, a dogtail, a child running, the glitter of a puddle, and you remember not to drop anything you might miss. Furniture is mostly a hammock and the idea of a shelf. Hammocks are the reigning monarchs of interior design. You do not sit. You are accepted. You climb in sideways like you're telling a secret. The cloth holds you as if you were mildly important. Many people have a personal hammock and a visiting hammock, just in case. The visiting one has a story of someone who slept only 5 minutes and woke to find that it was Tuesday again. When noon melts into the mid-afternoon, the world chooses shade. Repairs happen. A paddle's handle receives a carved pattern that matches a grandparent's work from decades ago. A quiet signature the river will understand. A thatch roof gets a new stitch. A basket tightens its own logic as someone weaves. Children practice with a miniature bow and arrows aimed at guava targets that inconveniently keep being delicious. A sloth watches from a tree with the facial expression of a very patient teacher, which is possibly a misinterpretation because sloths have one facial expression for everything, including tax news. Still, the resemblance is appreciated. Ritual slips in like a second current. Outsiders use the word as if it described fireworks. Here it describes memory. A certain community's glove, woven of leaves, is fitted with bullet ants, not to punish, but to teach steadiness. The ant's sting is famous and loud on paper. In practice, it becomes a dense, private radio station broadcasting into a single hand. Elders sing, and the pain does what pain sometimes does when confronted with a song. It reorganizes itself into something that can be monitored rather than obeyed. Afterward, salve is rubbed in circles, and someone tells a harmless joke about how the forest had been hoping to meet the new adult. No victory parade, just a face in the circle that has changed from learning to helping learn. If drama is required, the thunder will handle it. Other customs are even smaller. A father may adopt kuvad, quietly mirroring a mother after birth, eating gentle foods and speaking in a tone that refuses to jar the house. Names arrive slowly after someone notices that the baby laughs like the first rain in October or sleeps, with one eyebrow lifted like a particular ant. It is efficient in the only way that matters. Everyone knows who the child is when the name appears, because the name has been seen first and only then spoken. If a name repeats an ancestor, it does not replace them. It extends their interesting habits. The menu has footnotes and seasons. Certain fish are never troubled at particular times of year, and if you're hungry, you become patient rather than clever. A pregnant person avoids a restless animal's meat so the baby will not borrow it. Midnight hobbies. Sacred plants do not become soup, not because they are hoarded, but because they belong to a different conversation that begins with smoke and ends with gratitude. Outsiders make lists and call them taboos. Insiders make relationships and call them dinner later. Everyone eats what the calendar and the river signed off on, with chili, salt, or laughter as condiments. While we're on the subject of eating, the forest keeps a large, low cabinet filled with medicines none of which are labeled in the way pharmacies prefer. If your joints complain, andoroba oil listens and nods. If your stomach files a grievance, there's a ginger that votes for calm. If fever gets haughty, a bitter bark makes an argument that fever finds strangely persuasive. Guarana paste is pounded on a stone, dried into a firm baton, and later shaved into a cup for a morning that would otherwise be shy. Knowledge lives in people rather than in bottles. A grandmother points to 5 plants without standing up and cures 3 kinds of trouble. Payment is usually respect. Receipts are stories. Herbal twins live here too, and they are exactly the reason a guest is invited to look but not to try. One vine's sap renders a sting helpless. Another vine of the same general attitude would like to discuss shutting down your weekend plans. Forever, 2 berries are identical until the moment they are not. A frog the size of a thumbnail wears a color that communicates shockingly fluent warnings. Nobody turns these into games. The rule is old and simple. If you didn't learn it from a person who learned it from a person who learned it from someone who still smiles when they see that plant, then you didn't learn it. The jungle is clear on intellectual property. Seasons alter furniture. In the dry months, the river writes beaches. Children become civil engineers and design sand cities with admirable drainage and unreliable taxation. Adults pull canoes up and patch a seam with tree resin that smells like the forest. Telling a cheerful secret, then comes the rain that forgets to stop. It doesn't fall, really. It arrives from multiple directions. The river visits the stairs. Hammocks are retied higher, which is not difficult for experts. Chickens learn new leadership structures and roost like sailors. Paths become discrete canals. People keep calm because this is page 78 of the local manual and has notes in the margin about whose roof held up best 3 floods ago. Predators are here, just not interested in publicity. A caiman drifts, looking like a complicated stick. Piranhas continue to be unfairly famous. They are picky and often late. A jaguar's paw print appears near muddy banks, around punctuation. Mark describing a sentence nobody needs to finish. You probably will never see the author. Mosquitoes, on the other hand, are appointment-based and flexible. They attend weddings, funerals, and any gathering involving soup. The real hazards are the extremely small ones. You already know stumbling on a wet log because you admired a kingfisher too long. Forgetting the sun loves you aggressively. Assuming a fruit wants to be eaten when its twin is the one that actually had that in mind. Daily life returns to simple utilities. Nets are mended with small knots that look decorative but are actually literature. They say, try again. This held once, this will hold again. Blowguns rest along house. Beams like quiet relatives. A child is taught the 3 knots for roof, river, and emergencies, which overlapping categories cover most events. The clay griddle cools only when it is told, and then only a little. Someone checks the garden for manioc, and for a shy herb that keeps flies from believing everything they hear. Night arrives gently by dimming the greens down to black and leaving. The lights on insects. Frogs debate percussion. That straw calligraphy nobody reads and everyone enjoys. The moon makes an effort. If a storm loiters, lightning flashes white across leaves polished by their own rain. Hammocks sway in unison, like a village sharing one long breath. Somewhere upriver, a very thoughtful canoe bumps a very patient dock, and you can tell whether it returned home with fish or with gossip by the rhythm of the bumping. Both are good. The thing an outsider learns on the first day that they do not last is that jungle time is not time plus chaos. It is time plus attention. You do not hurry a canoe. You aim it and agree. You do not yell at rain. You collect it. You do not step heavily. You negotiate with your own feet. You hang the hammock with a knot that can be untied even after a long nap. You keep your cup on the same beam every time, and the forest rewards your consistency by letting you find it, in the dark without fuss. If the glove of ants happens to be your day, you keep your face loose, like someone about to be photographed by a friend. The song loops, the hand burns and learns, salve cools. You are taken to a hammock, not for heroics, but for the standard. Practice of returning a person to their usual shape. By evening you can carry wood again, laugh in the right places, and point at the sky when a strange moth as large as a plate flutters by as if late for its own biography. The village registers your survival with the quiet formality it reserves for ripe fruit, gratitude, and a plan to share. Dawn will come back in the same confident air sweep as before. Someone will grate cassava, and someone will flip a fish with a wooden paddle that a grandfather carved before you were clever. Children will bat a mango with an arrow and then eat the evidence. Dogs will be employed in remaining horizontal. A sloth will commute and arrive later, satisfied. The leafcutters will hoist their flags again. Heat will hold your shoulders with familiar care. And when you close your eyes, you'll hear the river making its reliable sound, a long exhale that isn't finished yet. That is the secret about not lasting here. The jungle is very good at lasting for you. It continues gently, even as you sleep, and will keep continuing when you wake, because continuation is what it has always practiced. You may fall asleep before any of this finishing. That is fine. Someone is still stirring the pot with a spoon. Worn thin by a century of stews, a night bird flicks its tail, the lantern hums, and the house floats above the ground on its slim legs as confidently as if it had learned to walk. The air tastes faintly of smoke and tree flowers. Nothing requires an ending. The river bends around the village as it always does, and the hammocks make a slow tide, in and out, like breathing that decided to become furniture. If you're still awake, you already know how it goes from here. The jungle wakes before you do, and that is more than enough. You might expect morning to begin with light, but in the Amazon, it begins with texture. The air is felt before it is seen, a soft, warm cloth pressed gently over your face by a very polite cloud. A rooster is unnecessary. Even the sun seems to arrive late, as if it knows the air has already made arrangements. The thatch above you sweats in slow, satisfying beads. A tin mug grows a tiny constellation of moisture and pretends it is weather. Somewhere a frog the size of a thumbnail remarks to the universe that it exists, and then forgets why it said anything. If you're still awake by the time I explain the difference between the ant that brings you leaves like confetti and that brings you a life lesson, feel free to subscribe. Or just turn the volume down and let the humidity finish the lecture. For me, the heat here has no beginning and no end. It is not a flare, it is a policy. People wake early and treat it like a relative whose habits are well understood. Firewood is coaxed into a helpful mood while the light is still gray. The first work is quiet work, scraping cassava, washing the starch from the pulp, packing it into the long woven sleeve called a tippity. The sleeve is one of those tools that looks like a friendly snake and operates like a gentle press. A person leans back against a post and pulls, and the bitter juice leaves as if it has been dismissed from a meeting. What stays behind is made into a flour that becomes flatbread on a clay griddle, a crisp circle that whispers when you tap it and is pleasantly unstartled by butterlessness. Coffee appears if someone keeps a tin of roasted beans tucked away. Otherwise, a gourd of guarana scraped into water performs the same magic like a small drum roll for the brain. Heat is consulted rather than fought. It is everywhere, and yet nobody wastes energy arguing with it, the way you don't argue with the concept of Tuesday. Then there are the mosquitoes, whose management style is enthusiastic. If you have ever wanted your ankles to feel popular, this is the right address. Sandflies add punctuation. Stingless bees drift through like unhurried auditors. The biting ant that looks like an average citizen is not. The ant that looks like a small machine is politely unbothered until stepped on. Leafcutter ants work along their highways carrying triangles of green like a slow parade of flags, each worker following the perfume of the one ahead, each convinced accurately that it is part of something excellent and fungal. A dragonfly unzips the morning air with the sound of a tiny zipper tested once and found satisfactory. Even the sweat has a schedule. It arrives on cue, and later, if you sit still, decides you have done enough. Daily life fits itself to this tempo. Fishing has more than one method, which means more than one vocabulary. You can set a funnel-shaped trap woven from palm fiber in the stream where the current slows, and later unroll a silver paragraph of fish that were thinking about something else. You can cast a net patched with knots that tell the story of previous. Mornings each repair a useful footnote. You can climb to the low branches and drop a line where shadows congregate, remembering to aim under the refraction because water bends truth in friendly ways. Or you can move upriver to a pool and release a small dose of timbo, the crushed vine that convinces fish to nap. Briefly, at the surface, a method with enough rules to make sages happy, never in the main channel, never where others draw water, always with the agreement of the shore. Hunting chooses patience over heroics. A blowgun taller than its owner stands gleaming with the polish of years, a straight tube that holds its own silence. Darts lie in a leaf tray like serious little pencils. Each gets a smear of dark paste from a vine that is famous for stopping. Hearts if introduced improperly and very useful for ensuring dinner if introduced gently. People call it many names. The forest knows exactly what it is. Children start with a tiny set of darts that could not bother a sturdy fruit, which is exactly what they aim at. Somewhere a monkey expresses an opinion on politics from the high branches and is unanimously ignored. Houses rise on stilts because water is seasonal and enthusiastic. Under the floor, dogs nap in the shade, their paws occasionally twitching in a dream where lizards are slow and inevitable. Chickens negotiate with the concept of height and eventually pick a beam. The interior furniture consists of hammocks, a few shelves, and the idea of a table. Hammocks have careers. There's the one where your grandmother sits, which is also her throne and her rocking chair and her office. There is the visiting hammock, which is ceremonially offered with a phrase that translates to rest a little, meaning rest as long as you like, which in turn means you will awaken to a cup of something, probably sweet, possibly medicinal, occasionally both. The roof is a brilliant book of palm leaves overlapped to shrug off rain, and it makes a sound like applause when a storm arrives. Not frantic applause, gentle applause, the kind you hear at a poetry reading when the poet ended. Properly, work as many small decisions rather than a few large ones. A paddle gets its handle notched so that the hand knows where to return without thinking. A basket is tightened with fiber that remembers how it was grown. Red dye from Euricum seeds turns infants into luminous little statues against insects, and Sun, a pet macaw rescued from wherever it was previously busy, supervises with the authority of a clerk who understands filing systems. A gecko attends to mosquitoes with the agreeable efficiency of a janitor who likes his job. A sloth inches through the canopy with the dignity of a diplomat moving through a crowd, arriving at the meeting in a week or two, which is on time by sloth standards and slightly early by some human standards. Rituals exist here not to create spectacle, but to introduce precision. Take the bullet and glove. Outsiders mention it with capital letters, but insiders speak about it the way you might discuss a bridge you need to cross correctly. The woven glove is prepared with care. The ants are coaxed into it with leaves that smell like persuasion. A young person wears it and keeps their breathing, even while elders sing in a tempo that says, We have done this before and we'll do it again. The learning is not to defeat pain. The learning is to become larger than it for a while and then to become yourself again without making a ceremony about having a stronger hand. There's salve afterward, and someone tells a story in which the forest is impressed, but trying not to show it. Other customs are quieter. In some places, when a child is born, the father stays near and eats gently for days, as if his voice is resting too. He may avoid spices, he may speak softer than usual, and he will certainly be seen carrying water with a concentration that suggests the buckets are a sacred species. Names are earned by watching. A baby who frowns in sleep like a particular ant will eventually be called by a word that nods to that ant. So everyone will be ready for the day when the child opens a basket and arranges its contents into symmetrical groups without being told why. Whistling at night is avoided because it might be rude to spirits or to owls. Either way, the rule produces a beautiful result. Darkness full of low conversation. Taboos around food look like science with poetry attached. During the months when a fish species is busy making more fish, nobody seeks it. The river has a calendar, and people can read it with no paper. A certain animal is respected for the foolish reason that it is foolish, and one does not eat someone whose methods are that familiar. Another is avoided because it scratches the dirt habitually. There is an old idea that scratching might cause the baby to arrive with a restless skin, and while modern readers may smile, the community has a philosophical preference for infants who sleep. Sacred plants do not become soup, because they are partners in a different conversation, the kind that begins with smoke and ends many hours later with excellent advice about where not to build the new house. If you are an outsider, the medicine cabinet of the forest appears to be an elaborate practical joke. Every cure looks like its own cousin. Here's a clear oil from the andaroba nut that quiets biting insects and stern joints with equal courtesy. Here's copaiba, a resin that tastes like an argument but is marvelous for stubborn scrapes. A bark called quina is bitter enough to frighten your tongue, yet fever respects it, which feels like excellent diplomacy. Tobacco is not a vice so much as a pharmacist. Its smoke chases pests from skin and thought when used like a tool. Stingless. Bees make honey in little wax pots, and a spoon from those vessels is how some mornings begin when the voice needs to remember sweetness. There are pastes rubbed along the forearm to encourage strength, and powders that invite clear dreaming, and plants that everyone knows about and no one names loudly. Because names sometimes call things over, the problem for visitors is that medicine has twins. The vine that stops bleeding stands next to the vine that stops afternoons. Two mushrooms look affectionate and are only pretending. Berries that want to be eaten audition beside berries that file lawsuits. The forest solved this by outsourcing the job of label making to grandmothers. They know exactly which leaf has a quiet paper smell and which leaf has the same smell but a different sense of humor, a distinction one learns across decades of walking and asking. A rule that seems simple is actually perfect. If you learned it from a person, you learned it. If you read it in a pamphlet and marched into the hedge will win. The rainforest takes turns being friendly and reminding you who owns the switches. Floods arrive not as disasters, but as annual demonstrations. The river steps gracefully over its own banks and enters the yard like a neighbor carrying a casserole, then sets it down on your staircase. People tie canoes to bedposts and hang the hammocks slightly higher, which is not difficult because every home has at least 3 favorite heights. The fish visit the grass. Children learn new map skills. Chickens reassays leadership and end up on top of a wardrobe, writing memoirs with their eyes. Paths become elegant canals and then, after a month or two, become paths again without apology. Predators. have publicists who exaggerate. Jaguars are ghosts who leave signatures round paw prints, a sudden quiet in the birds, and rarely apply for interviews. Piranhas prefer gossip to action unless conditions are exactly right, which they mostly are not. Electric fish hum softly to each other at night, like appliances left on. The Hoatzin bird smells like it overslept in a barn and is perfectly content with that. Capybaras look like if a couch had an opinion, and that opinion was wet. The most persistent danger is the assumption that you were invited to climb that log right after it rained. The second is believing you will definitely remember which plant your guide indicated as yes, rather than not unless you wish to write. A poem from the perspective of a stomach. Evenings are successful because they are predictable. Someone turns the cassava flour into a batter for beiju pancakes. Someone else grinds chili until the air becomes politely spicy. Fish cooks and leaves, sealing in a flavor that tastes like the river telling you a secret it tells everyone. Talking travels slowly around the room like a pleasant insect. Stories about ancestors include the same gestures they used so that families become time machines. A dog sighs and distributes itself on the floor. The hammocks swing so subtly that it may in fact be you who is swinging. Unless gravity has become a little experimental tonight, the outsider's clock tries its old tricks. What time is it? How long is this? What are we doing tomorrow? And the forest gives it a soothing answer. It is leafcutter o'clock. It is as long as smoke lasts in still air, and tomorrow looks a lot like today, plus that new knot you learned for the paddle. The jungle wakes before you do, yes, but it also goes to bed after you. And during all those hours, it is engaged in a project that looks like noise and is actually coordination. A moth finds the exact flower with the exact perfume at the exact minute it opens. A frog sings a note that fits perfectly into the note sung by something that is not a frog but shares a sense of pitch. An owl rotates politely toward the source of a sound and rotates back when it recognizes your hammock doing nothing of interest. If you stayed long, you would learn the generosity of repetition. The bread would crack the same way on the griddle each morning, and the handle of the cup would become the map your fingers expect. Your feet would remember where the ladder creaks and would avoid adding drama. You would begin to smell the difference between rain that is visiting and rain that plans to move in. You would hear leafcutter traffic on the path at night and think, they have a deadline. And in this slow expertise, you would discover that not lasting a day has less to do with strength than with vocabulary. The forest speaks in measurements of patience, and your body is fluent in those within a week if you let it. For now, though, you can simply rest inside the grammar of a place that has been practicing being itself for a very long time. The air folds around you again, humming its mild hymn. Somewhere a stingless bee tidies its wax jar. Somewhere a canoe, turned upside down for the night, dreams of water. The river makes the sound it has always made, which is a kind of long, calm sentence with no need for a period. Heat smooths your shoulders like a warm hand that knows the way. Hammocks breathe in long commas. Names of plants go on saying themselves to people who can hear them. And if your eyes close now, nothing will mind. The jungle will wake before you do, and it will already have brewed the day.